I'm very pleased to introduce to you our very first speaker. And as I mentioned, she is from Autodesk Construction Cloud, our gold sponsor. And we're very happy to introduce Amy Marks to you. Now, Amy is head of the Industrialized Construction Strategy Group for Autodesk. She's a graduate of the University of Florida, an alumna of the Harvard Business School. She's enthusiastic, informative, and eagerly willing and waiting to share her presentation with us. So let's give it a listen. You're about to learn something real special. Amy, take it away.
Thank you so much. I apologize. We had a little bit of a technical glitch, but I think we're over it now. So I want to talk today about the owner's playbook. And for those of you who have never met me before, or weren't at the last CURT conference that I was at, this is meant to make you feel a little bit uncomfortable. If you walk away from this talk today and you're like, oh, that was what I already knew, we've done something wrong. So I want to let you know, I want to give you permission to be uncomfortable for a little while, and that's okay. So a little bit about me, you just heard a lot about me, but I will tell you the one interesting thing I think that you need to know about me is that I've really worked within the IC space, the industrialized construction space, from lots of different stakeholder perspectives. I've worked for big owners, I've worked for general contractors, I've worked on project-specific teams with architects, I've worked for big government, and I've worked all around the world on 6 of the 7 continents. And I've also been a fabricator. So I've been both a general contractor and a subcontractor and a fabricator. So I have a pretty unique perspective on the world, and you'll probably notice that from some of the things I talk about. I came to Autodesk because I taught process in my consulting business for many years, how to enable and optimize industrialized construction. But in order to really make it work and to change the world, Autodesk convinced me to come and work with them so that we could make this sticky through the tech. And so I'm really here to talk about the concepts, the thoughts, the thought leadership, and then also as well, how tech can really enable that. But if you haven't noticed already, our world is converging. We have industry convergence with industrialized construction as a business case for that. You see a lot of process convergence with design make. We see technology convergence. We see convergence even within your own ecosystems of the industries you work with, whether that, take any industry like data centers and subsea are converging. You're seeing people's job functions converge and process converge all over the place. So what does that mean to us? What does it mean to our business models as owners? What does it mean to the supply chain that supports us, how we work with them? I think this convergence is really important for us to recognize that it's happening because it has a huge impact for owners on the space. And I say in our ecosystem, right? We're not an industry, we're an ecosystem. You're seeing lots of different industries with different drivers for value converge at this point. And along with that, we have some sustainability issues. And so I would be remiss if I didn't talk about sustainability, not just from environmental. As you can see here, 40% of solid waste comes from the construction industry. That's unacceptable to me. But it's not just about environmental sustainability, which many of you as owners, or even as supporting contractors in our ecosystem have sustainability goals. But we have to think of sustainability, having again a little tech issue, I apologize. We have to look at sustainability from 4 quadrants. We have to look at it from social sustainability, economic sustainability, environmental, and industry sustainability, right? So industrialized construction allows us to bring young people into the space through the use of tech and allows us to co-locate factories in locations that actually need to drive economic change. And so we need that for our industry, our economy, and also to create social, better social situations for people that want to come to the space. So I like to think of industrialized construction, by the way, for those of you who are lean manufacturing followers and practitioners like me, I think of this as almost like the house that Toyota built. This is the house that industrialized construction built. We have a big language problem in our space, right? We are constantly speaking different languages. I always hear people say things like modular when they don't mean modular, and they say DFMA as if it means prefab. And there's all kinds of confusion when it comes offsite. Everyone loves to say now, which to me is just a location specific word. But in reality, this is the house and the language that the nomenclature I've level set on for the moment. But the house that I see built, really the first thing I have to say is just because it says industrialized construction doesn't mean it doesn't affect every part of the built environment. So it's really the application of manufacturing techniques to the entirety of the built environment: design, conceptualization, construction, assembly, procurement, all the way through operate, and really the circular economy. So we're really attaching and utilizing manufacturing techniques across the entirety of the board. So that's the biggest part of the convergence you'll see as well. So let's start at the bottom here at the foundation. You have technology enablers like the cloud and big data and analytics, as well as IoT. As we integrate more IoT into our buildings, they're going to become more like responsive, breathing, dealing with the users in the real time and giving us feedback and information about those buildings as it's happening, right? We need to understand things like digital twins and how IoT is going to give us information about digital twins and big data and analytics. What do we do with the data we're creating right now? We actually have a really big data problem in this ecosystem. We collect a lot of data. We don't necessarily collect a lot of good data that we can utilize for predictive and for analytics and things like that. We really need more data, and you'll see why I believe productization and data and the platform is going to give you a lot more consistency in the data and being able to understand the data. If you haven't understood that the cloud is very important at this point, you haven't been paying attention. We've obviously been in a pandemic for over a year, and many of our customers, especially at the Autodesk Construction Cloud and the new unified platform, were unable to work unless they were in the cloud, like our customers, and work with stakeholders across different geos during the pandemic. We've got to get, in some ways, in the cloud and able to collaborate more easily, right? Then you have things like lean manufacturing. I'm saying lean manufacturing on purpose. Listen up, guys that love lean construction. We have to put the manufacturing principles back into lean construction and the LCI. It's not all about just full planning and percent plan complete. We are truly seeing the convergence of manufacturing and construction and manufacturing into design. And we have to recognize that lots of the tools, as you know, in lean these days are very trade centric. You know, I teach a class called element centric target value design, right? So we're thinking about productization and not just by trade. If estimates are by trade and drawings are by trade and scopes are by trade and everything is by trade, it doesn't matter how lean you are, or if a small group you bring people on and they don't fabricate, it doesn't matter what tools you have, you will not get optimized prefabrication. So just because you practice lean does not mean that you get prefabrication, but lean manufacturing can be a big driver for us as we go towards productization and also in better manufacturing techniques as we see these practices evolve within our own ecosystem. Building information modeling, I could almost straddle that between technology and process. That truly has to be multidimensional CAD if you want to do all the amazing things that you can do when you finally have functional, discrete data that you can share across a platform. And building information modeling is one of the foundational tools along with lean manufacturing that you need to have in order to get to the new possible, right? So design for manufacturing assembly, I will briefly touch upon this because it's one of the most misunderstood concepts within industrialized construction, but we'll go through that a little bit later. So pause on that. That's the enabling methodology that allows you to get optimized prefab. Then you have the physicality on the next level up. And so you have advanced building products that reduce drying time, curing time, welding time, hot work, and they're basically creating better flow on the job site. They come like that from the manufacturers, and oftentimes they are not utilized within job sites because we only do first cost analysis on whether or not that advanced building product is cheaper than its not as smart counterpart. There's a reason it has advanced building properties, and usually it's to reduce manpower from the site, increase safety and increase flow. And so we're not actually looking at those materials correctly and incorporating them into the jobs as much as we could. Where we are doing really well in the space is with single and multi-trade assemblies. Much better with single because they're able to be incorporated almost without the input of an architect or a general contractor. Many of the subcontractors are driving single trade assembly installations and even from a design perspective as their own means and methods. It gets a little bit more complex on multi-trade, but we are even seeing more and more of that. So I think recently there was a study out by Dodge that said 3/4 of all specialty subcontractors are utilizing multi-trade, and 2/3 of general contractors in the US in the past 3 years all have experience with multi-trade. it's basically becoming standard practice on heavy MEP projects. And so we're seeing that more and more. You may or may not be seeing that as the owner, because there are things that are a lot of times underground behind the walls above the ceilings where all the heavy MEP, and I'm going to say hint, where all your money is. Sometimes you're not seeing the value of this because it's in a lot of those hidden places that are being actually conceptualized as means and methods downstream. And then volumetric modular, those are when they actually are the building structure. And these are not mutually exclusive. Hopefully you're not just building empty boxes. That's not going to give you a lot of value. And hopefully you're not building modules in a conventional way underneath a roof. You need to apply manufacturing techniques, and almost like Russian dolls, you need to use everything in the continuum as you move across the continuum to the next assembly that you see there. So hopefully we make it more like that and more effective. And then we can apply advanced building methodologies like robotics and automation and additive manufacturing to that physicality of product. That's really the language and the nomenclature, the taxonomy that we use right now. And then I'm sure many people have probably seen this, but over the next 15 years, McKinsey has said that 45% of the architectural, engineering, and construction value chain is going to shift away from traditional processes. That's almost half. Now, for those big owners, if half of your building value is going to move towards prefabricated pieces and parts, 30% of that is going to be in prefab, by the way. The rest of your building needs to know how to incorporate that. And it's not like it's so cut and dry. So basically, when you're talking about half the value chain is moving towards this, you really have to recognize it as it's almost all, right? So if you look at that chart, what's really interesting about that chart is there are losers and quote unquote winners on that chart. Who are the winners? Well, definitely what they're considering offsite construction. Again, not a term that I actually really like so much, but you're talking about fabrication away from the job site as the biggest gain, up to 30%. You're also seeing machinery and manufacturing because it's going to support that in the advanced building methods. I'd like to see more there as well. And then technology is actually doubling the spend because as you move towards these advanced building methods, you're going to need more technology to connect the design and make process, to move the information from make up into design. There are some interesting parts about that. The expected implications is that there will be more value created if you look in that 15 to 20 number up here in the 40 to 45%. There's additional value up for grabs. So if you're here in support of these owners and you would like to understand what the future of your business looks like, not only is it in prefabrication being done off site and machinery as well as tech, there's a lot up for grabs there. I think where it comes into play is going to be on systems integration. If you ask me, there'll be a lot of that. And that'll be a lot of also in productization and influencing the supply chain and digitization. So there's some hints there about what the new possible actually looks like for you as stakeholders. So, and just to get a little bit more specific on who I'm talking to at this event, I like to talk about owners. There are different kinds. If you were at the last CURT event that I was at, I was on a panel with two different owners. One had a very small geographic footprint that I would consider. And the other one, which by the way, he was very outspoken that he just puts everything in the hands of his designers and contractors. And like he gives them tells them what he wants and they should design and build it. That can work if you're in a small geo, right? It doesn't work when you're a serial owner and you want consistency across multiple geos where your operations are more important than just first cost of your buildings that you're building in. You need more of a playbook then where you are understanding the data value, you own that data, and you want to dictate more often than not how you're going to have your buildings designed and built, what partners you're going to be using, because you pick to consistently use the same partners because you're using elements repetitively, and lots of those are decoupled as prefabricated elements from the continuum you just saw. That's a big difference. Serial owners want consistency. They value that over anything else. It's almost like, and by the way, I came up with that term because it was kind of like serial killers. They kill the same way with a signature style, but you know it's them. That's how we have to think of the way in which operational consistency works for these owners. It's more important for them to get their product out of the building or to get people in the building or to service their customers in the building than it is for them to pushed down onto a general contractor to beat up a subcontractor for a small percentage savings overall, which means nothing. So we have to really, I'm talking today mostly to the serial owners. By the way, owners that aren't necessarily in that category, you can also behave this way. You just have to change your value proposition of what you're looking for. Then I like to speak a lot to vertical integrators, people that are extending beyond the traditional silos, right? We're a cash for chaos ecosystem right now. We do a lot of things and get paid for them within a silo, but they don't necessarily create value for the group next to it or downstream. In fact, like one of my favorite kind of things to talk about is, we draw a lot of things up front for intent that basically get chucked over two silos. Somebody actually draws what we're gonna build, and then they pass it back up to the first silo, and then they coordinate that into their original intention drawings. And that's waste. We have digital waste. And the reason we have digital waste is for a lot of reasons. Some owner pays them to do that work that's wasteful. The contracts are set up for that. So that's why they perform that skill set. And we really have to start breaking down the silos. And I wrote a paper called Creative Destruction for the New Possible. We've got to break those down. I need my serial owners to help us break down these silos. And the vertical integrators are trying to overcome that by mostly integrating fabrication into their business. And you'll see a lot of different silos doing that. I have owners becoming vertical integrators and fabricating their stuff right now because they want to understand that process and they want that value up front. I have architects that are opening up practices around industrialized construction, inclusive of opening up their own fabrication facilities. We've seen many of the general contractors, in fact, most of the big general contractors own fabrication facilities or are starting to understand systems integration from a performance perspective, right? Not just self-performance, but how to, that in situ piece and part, how are they actually aggregating these pieces and parts on sites? Those vertical integrators are going to be very important, but right now they're kind of brute forcing, taking over the silo next to them to try to understand it better because we've been so siloed. And then you've got the super subs, some of my favorite people on the planet, by the way. These are the guys and gals that love multi-trade. They've been doing the highly complex assemblies for many, many years. And if you had, I had to tell you, most of the robust fabrication knowledge lives in that space. That's like our knowledge base that we need to go to right now. Many of my serial owners know this because they've been overpassing some of the traditional players directly to the super subs to productize and create their playbooks with these partners. And they really need to productize upstream and become more like manufacturers. It's not enough just to say the person who has the knowledge should move to the front of the process. I'm 50 years old. Most of you know I'll be 50 this year. I talk about my age all the time, not because it's about me. It's because I just don't want to be here that much longer in the workforce. And I'd like what I know in my head to be applied with to this tech so that machine learning and AI can just make it so much smarter than it is in my head. We are losing a lot of the knowledge base in this ecosystem. We need to capture it up front in the tech so that we can utilize it to the best of its capabilities with things like machine learning. So what does that mean? We have to move the make and operate information up into design. This is the epitome of convergence that we're seeing going on right now. It has to live up there. It has to breathe up there. It can't be just put up there on a haphazard basis, on an ad hoc basis. And so DFMA is not a made-up term in construction and design. It actually comes from the manufacturing world where we talk about design for ease of manufacturing. Those are the design choices you make to make manufacturing easier. You would have to understand the supply chain that supports that specific manufacturer, and you would have to understand all the specific details that that manufacturer has for their products so that you could design correctly for what they can actually make most efficiently in their shop. Combine that, and we've concatenated the terms with design for assembly, which is the ease of assembly on site, the shipping, the handling, the installation. And you also need to understand that from a specific perspective of what piece and part we're talking about assembling. Are you top picking it? Are we transporting it? How do I protect it? How do I put it in place? How do I make sure that it connects to the rest of the system? And when you utilize DFMA, you're trying to mostly, for the most part, shorten the design cycle time. We're real good at fabricating things in our ecosystem. We are not very good at shortening the design cycle time for those really easily and quickly fabricated items because it's different than the way we design today. So we're not helping anybody if it's quicker to fabricate, but 6 times longer to design. And that's kind of where we are right now, which is why we need the owners to create a playbook so that we do that heavy lifting in advance. And we want to reduce material overhead and labor costs. And it really does that if you've implemented great design for manufacturing and assembly principles. And a lot of these things utilize standards to reduce costs. I was working with a big semiconductor fabrication company. And interestingly enough, I taught a class on DFMA, and I won't say who it is. And one of my favorite people on the planet came back the next day and he said, I went through this catalog. We're going to use these metal stairs, one type of them. Here's the product number. I looked across our entire fab facility, and we're actually customizing stairs for all of our equipment. We're not going to do that anymore. We're just going to create some standards, and that's what we're going to use. And we're going to stop designing that. I often tell people one of the biggest measures for design and virtual design shouldn't be how many things you're drawing and how fast. It's probably better to think about what you don't have to draw anymore. And that really turns things on its head. But this is really hard, DFMA, because I just told you that they're proprietary and element specific. And so therefore it has to live up in the software, but for that, we're going to keep thinking the only methodology is to bring the fabricator and the one guy or the one woman who knows how to do it, they're up to the front of the process. So we have to start capturing this and making it connected in the platform in software. So the other thing I like to talk about is that there's a difference between prefabrication and productization. And although they call me the queen of prefab, it's kind of like lower level as you talk about the framework of evolution. Fabrication is great, and that's an amazing central utility plant done by H.T. Lyons on the left over there. But Kohler is truly productized. Designers design around a Kohler generator. They understand the capacities and the scope and the sizes. They don't actually wake up in the morning like they did probably for the central utility plant, and they made choices that didn't make fabrication very easy, even if somebody advised them, because usually they're not there early enough. And even when they are, my manufacturers, my guys have a problem actually conveying the information that's right for their fabrication process, because they're mostly fabricators. They're not manufacturers yet. Manufacturers have that down and they know how to communicate that, which is why no architect wakes up in the morning and says, I'm going to make a 17.5 horsepower generator today. And by the way, I'm going to design a new alternator for the Kohler generator because I feel like it. That doesn't happen, right? We don't do that. And so we have to create products in our world now in construction, much like Kohler generators. We have to stop doing this. And my owners, by the way, I have construction going on today, which was supposed to be quiet at this time. Unfortunately, you can hear hammering. It's not prefab in my home today, but we have to stop making, designing, and buying snowflakes. I love the story about an owner that I talked to last year, and they were talking about data centers. And they said, we knew that there was a product line out there for hot aisle containment systems that were prefabricated. And I said, yes, I love data centers. I used to build a lot of data centers. I have a passion for it. So they said, well, we told our design team that they should get a prefabricated hot aisle containment system. And they said, great, we'll make sure that we do that. And then so they designed something, a general contractor bought it out, and then it got installed, and they went back to the owner. And the owner, who is a manufacturer, interestingly enough, said, how did that go? And they said, well, it was more expensive than conventional. And he said, I don't understand. It's prefabricated. Why would it be more than conventional? And they said, that's just how prefabrication is. And he said, I don't believe that. So he went to the right to the manufacturer and said, hey, my design and construction team is telling me that you're more expensive than conventional. And the owner said of the manufacturing facility, yes, we were for you. And he said, why? And he said, well, you designed something that we don't make, actually. Our standard product line, scalable standard product line, is this scalable product line. You didn't buy anything like that. You bought some differences that we had to adjust the production line and the supply chain that we have to accommodate for you. But by the way, we could have brought your price down if you gave us more than one. If you had given us 5 and guaranteed us 5 over the next year, I would have allocated those costs across all 5, and I could have brought your price down. And so the owner was very perplexed that nobody understood this concept of manufacturing. And I said, look, I have my red shoe behind me. I love fashion and couture. For those of you who don't know what couture means, it's the one special dress that Madonna wears at, the Grammys. You can't buy it off the rack, but it's very expensive. I said, you basically went to the Gap and you bought couture, like Madonna's one-off dress, when all you needed was a black sheath extra large dress. And he said, you're right. That's why this, you know, if I didn't dig into it, somebody would have just told me this was more expensive. And I said, that's why we need to apply manufacturing techniques to the built environment. So how do you do that? You've got to have a product-led mindset, right? We're kind of living down here in the initial ad hoc and sometimes repeatable, right? Because I just told you, sometimes we get drawings and we kind of cut them up the best way we can to fabricate them, but it's not optimized because nobody was there up front informing the process, and the software didn't necessarily inform the process. And so then maybe we get the same guy up there who's done something like it before, and we make it somewhat repeatable, or pieces of it are repeatable, but not entirety in its whole form. To get past that, which is why we have sort of like good and some bad examples of prefabrication, you truly have to productize. We have to define, manage, and optimize products, and they have to move up front in the process of conceptualization, like that generator. Now, that's easy to say, and I'm not saying it to one of the stakeholders, I'm saying it to all of you, but for a minute, I'm going to talk directly to my productizers, not just the subs, because I just told you general contractors are fabbing, architects are fabbing, some owners are fabbing and productizing. So if you truly want to go to a product mindset, you have to define these things. You have to understand the scope and benefits of your product. You need to understand the DFMA principles and the interfaces of adjacent systems. You have to manage the bill of process fabrication and understand QA/QC. All the inspection processes have to be understood and outlined. Cost and lead times, the scalable product line, you have to understand the material optimization. And how are you digitizing these as functional models and drawings for the bill of materials? And then, yes, we have to apply automation and robotics to the entirety of these product lines. Every building will not look like this. I wish I could see the audience right now. I usually pick out my architects and say, every building you design, if we productize, will not look like this. And they say, I don't believe you. And then I say, let me prove it to you. It's proven in a lot of different ecosystems and industries, like this one. You can hear I'm redoing my house in the background right now. And I could actually go, and I want music, and I could go online and buy a product like Sonos. And Sonos, but by the way, there's no product placement here for anybody. I'm just happening to pick the things that I'm looking at, but I could buy Sonos for any one of my rooms, and I could pay a certain amount of money for it, and it's productized where I can go and self-serve, right? And yes, if I buy Sonos and my neighbor buys Sonos, they look pretty much the same, like that building would look. And sometimes that's okay if that's all you need. And sometimes that's okay if it's for things that are behind the wall, above the ceiling, or they're for performance indicators and they're not for the aesthetic use. It's okay that they all look the same and act the same. I always say I don't know any architects that love to draw fire stairs. No one really cares how aesthetically appealing they are. So yes, those things will look the same. But in the same world, I can go down in my very nice town to a very high-end audio consultant, and I can say, listen, I'm really into music. In fact, I listen on vinyl and CD, and I love movies. And they're going to ask me a million questions about the parameters of my experience, of my choices, of the performance, of everything that I want to understand, the way music makes me feel, right? I call that the art of sound, right? And that person, that consultant, is going to put together a system, which, by the way, Sonos might cost, I don't know, X, and my art of sound might cost 300 times X, right? Because I want something amazing. So he puts together a sound system for me for the art of sound. But he doesn't make speaker wire, right? He's not building me a new record player. He uses that based on the products that are readily available, that have the performance requirements that he can see very easily in his connected ecosystem, and pick them out and utilize those and choices to pick the right system. It frees him up. Listen up, architects. It frees him up to build me something custom in my pretty girly home that doesn't look like that ugly black speaker to me, but he creates a custom cover for it that's white and silver and gray and matches the aesthetics of my home. And he can actually do something really cool digitally that he knows how to do that no one else does, because he doesn't make speaker wire. That's the difference, right, between what we're talking about here. Not every building has to be the same. Or parts of it can be if I want operational consistency, and that's okay too. So let's move away from the physicality for a minute, and let's talk software for a minute. There is software products, tools or packages that usually come from one company, and everything's contained within that package. Sometimes it's really hard to add new tools to it, depending on the product and the company that made it. And then there are platforms. This is a portfolio of products. Most of you know lots of our portfolio products like AutoCAD and Revit and the Autodesk Construction Cloud and our PLM software and all of our manufacturing tools, as well as our media and entertainment tools. And the value doesn't necessarily just come from each of those products, but from the connectivity of those products, not just to each other, but to external products and software, to the teams and data, connecting all those processes. So as an example, you will see a lot of logos in this platform slide that are not Autodesk's. And that's a great thing because the value of the ecosystem of the platform is not for us. It's for you, the owners, my serial owners, my end users, my general contractors, for all of you, the value of the platform is to make your life better. Here's the hard part about prefabrication and IC is that we in the past have thought we're going to use the same processes and same patterns and same pathways in the way in which we're going to design, plan, build, and operate. And that's just not true. So if you think about something like building information modeling, we went and Autodesk had Phil Bernstein, one of the greats, I would say, out there, and he evangelized about 3D and needing to move from a 2D to a 3D world. And then Autodesk bought Revit, and that was the answer. For industrialized construction, there is no hero product. So if I can tell you one thing today, if any one of you walks away with anything from this talk, here's what you should walk away with. There's no one ring to rule them all. I just showed you lots of different companies interacting across the platform that will make this possible. If anyone tells you that they have a software, one piece, one sliver of what's having to happen, or one company that's going to change everything, they're wrong. I'm not saying that to you even about Autodesk as well. And most of us are not big enough, even at Autodesk, to make this change in the ecosystem by ourselves. In fact, I need all the serial owners and the ecosystem influencers like Autodesk to work together with our current ecosystem players to make this possible. And right now, the connectivity has some gaps and overlaps dependent upon what industrialized construction methodology you're using, because this is in a transformation state right now. So it doesn't you can't change on a dime. And so we need to partner with the whole entirety of the ecosystem to identify where these gaps and overlaps are and to build product, to put partner product, competitors product, so that whatever, we can connect this connective tissue. And dependent upon the element that you're designing for it, they will take different pathways. So that's also important to note. You can't necessarily use the same pattern for an MEP heavy integrated assembly than you can for a precast panel. And so that we know, and it's very important for us to recognize that, and that we all have to help each other. To that end, at Autodesk, we're working with a convergence consulting group out of the manufacturing consulting side of our house, which does both business enterprise, strategy consulting, as you would see any big consulting company do. But we also do systems architecture, where we can look across multiple companies and geos and other people's, software and understand what the systems architecture truly should be in the way in which the process should work. And then we can work to attach tech, to attach automation and robotics, to attach culture, code, different things to that with our consulting business and our partner consulting channels that are specific to Autodesk. And that service is available to you as an Autodesk customer, and even if you're not an Autodesk customer. And that's something that you need to know, that especially if you're one of our bigger customers, we're dying to help you understand this process so that we can help you and help ourselves to close and prioritize lots of these gaps and overlaps. Underneath me, aside from the fact that I work with a whole consulting group, I have a product SWAT team based. I think they're like ninjas, and we recognize some of these gaps, and then we build product to connect the two. The current one we have built that we're in beta testing right now, if you're a productized company and you want to help beta test this, call me. And what it does is it actually automates the shop drawing process, working between Revit and Inventor. So you can actually productize with a push of a button shop drawings. And so I'm going to show you this, and hopefully we'll get sound. If not, somebody wave your arms around. But this is a 90-second video just to show you what some connective tissue looks like. We have volume. Someone can chat me if you can hear or not hear. Can you guys hear? I'm gonna pause because someone's chatting. Okay, let's give it 1 sec and see if I can help you, because I think this is important.
You have to share your audio.
Let's see if this works.
You have to share your audio from your computer.
I'm gonna go to my audio settings so you can hear this. Sorry about that, guys. Let's see if this will work. Let's back up and see if we can make this happen. I'm going to say no because I still hear it coming out of here. Let's try this. No. All right. Well, I'm going to walk you through it and talk you through it. How's that? This product actually literally allows you to go, and I'll post this in the chat, by the way, we'll give it access to it. It allows you to go into Inventor, set parameters, and with the IC drawing automation beta, if you have product, whether that's an assembly or anything that you're working with, an electrical assembly, a plumbing assembly, a pipe rack, or a pump skid, you can actually set the parameters within Inventor and understand the bill of materials and the bill of process and change it parametrically within Inventor. It's a much more robust situation than just doing geometric data like you've normally done sometimes in Revit. And what'll happen is you can set all these different parameters for your product and change height and width and, you know, cut the way in which you're going to cut the pipe and the sizes of that. You actually publish it to the IC automation software. And what happens is it'll go actually and make a connection in Revit. It will pull out in Revit those instances where those products may exist. It will actually pull them from the Revit model back into Inventor, and then it will populate all of the drawings that need to be done that we recognize as instances within the geometric model within Revit, so that you can go directly from geometric shape to productize to get to bidding faster if you're not partnering, hopefully, to get to getting things done sooner. So you're basically moving from a project mindset to product. And by the way, you can reuse this data. That's the important part about, that's the important part about it. Sorry, let me go to the next slide. You want to be able in future state to reuse the data. We'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, right? So once you've actually created those things in our beta product, you can reuse them for every job going forward so that we can ensure that we're productizing and getting some consistency and certainty around what's being drawn and actually what's being built. So what does your role look like in the new possible? And this is in general what it looks like, but I'm going to talk specifically about what it looks like for owners in a minute. But really right now, we've talked about the fact that we're siloed. We then also have a business model convergence that's going on. I told you that everyone's moving to vertically integrating, including my owners, and that we have serial owners that are moving across and getting to be not just influencers, but they're taking on more, I would say, risk, if you want to use that term, because I hear that a lot from owners, or at least I hear that from general contractors warning owners, if you want to get involved, you have to take on some of the risk, which is true. And you have to coordinate some of that risk. But the good news is just because you push risk onto somebody else doesn't mean it goes away. Actually, it goes away quicker if the person who's closest to the risk and can make the choices makes it go away by collaborating with everybody. So that's good. So those serial owners will actually influence and change the way in which they work in their business models. And again, I'm like using my crystal ball. The super subs kind of sometimes work directly with those serial owners. Sometimes the vertical integrators are everybody. But the one thing I definitely know in the future state is everybody makes products. I'm seeing it already right now. And then lots of people are becoming systems integrators across the board. And the owners truly, because they are spending the money and they have the need for geographic consistency, become the ecosystem influencers, probably for the most part. And then my architects and designers, as we mentioned, if you don't have to do some of those things that are more mundane, that are actually not the things you love to do, you truly become empowered designers by setting the parameters, not just for performance, but for end user experience and for the new world of a digitized supply chain and the way in which it interacts with, you know, living, breathing, self-healing, even reusable buildings one day. So you truly actually get a great role as the empowered designers. And at Autodesk, I truly believe that, and we know this, and we're every day moving to this direction to be a platform provider. So that's good for the ecosystem and good for all of you and good for us and the end users to make a more connected pattern. So how do you get there? Well, for us, I'm really open about sharing our strategy. This has been really hard to do with DFMA and prefabrication. I know, because I own my own business before coming here, just doing that for most of you in the big owner world, and also for the general contractors. DFMA has been pretty hard. And so we need to make this easier for you by mapping out these pathways and making them, known, and then easier to automate for you, and then removing some of the waste in between the silos. We have to connect the Autodesk platform with the ecosystem for IC. We got to use productization as a way to track the data and understand what's needed from a platform perspective for you, so that you can actually connect and collaborate with the IC community much better. Every time I get a call from one of my friends in the ecosystem, like, hey, do you know anybody who builds this or does this? I think to myself, that's wrong. That shouldn't live in my head. I love getting phone calls from my friends, but like, I don't want to be 70 years old and telling people who can make pipe racks. That doesn't belong in my head. It belongs in a centralized knowledge base. And Autodesk is a very neutral place to put that, which is why I came here. So now let's talk about change, because I think hopefully everyone sees the vision of what's definitely already happened and what is continuing to happen. So I love Dan Miller's formula for change. And it's really a cool formula that says you have to have first dissatisfaction. I didn't show you on purpose all those things about lagging productivity and digitization and we're dead last in tech and all. We all know that. If you don't know that and if you're happy as a general contractor making your average 2.5% as a commodity with infinite downside, all right, keep doing that. If you're an owner that's not getting consistency and your building costs a different thing every time and operationally you don't know how to function, great, then you're not unhappy. You know, if you're one of those guys that I met in the last conference, that's like fine with whatever the small geo is and you just leave it up to everybody else, it's probably not change, is not for you. But if you are dissatisfied and you think we can do better, you first need to have that in order to spur on some change. After you have dissatisfaction, you need to have a vision for what is even possible. What does the new possible look like? What is it like when I have certainty and productization and a playbook and I'm involved in collaborating and dictating what I want in the ecosystem? So after I'm like, yeah, I want that, I have to have some first concrete steps of action. I need to know what those are, because you're going to come up, all those things have to be greater than resistance. You will come up against resistance, mostly because, again, I told you we're in a cash for chaos siloed business. People are going to lose some of their money and territory, and they're going to fight to protect it. And we're going to need to break down some of those silos. So I would say in the transformation framework, this is really important. You have to understand why you're doing this, and we all have to align on that vision, right? And if that's your vision, and again, this is taking a shot at what I hear from most of our customers of what their vision is, if they're serial owners, and they want to understand these things that drive adoption, and they need a strategy for transformation. It's not just good enough for me to say, it's out there and you can have it, good luck. That's not enough. That's not my job. My job is to say, first, you need some foundational skills, tools, and processes. That's not just about prefabrication. That's going to be about technology assessments. That might be manufacturing, robotics, and automation assessments. That could be culture assessments. There are lots of things that we're doing that could be your business strengths, to understand what foundational skills, tools, and processes you need in order at the very baseline to see that new possible. By the way, I just talked to one of my customers the other day, and he buys a product that's a competing product against ours in the platform. And he's like, I am all in with you, Amy, on IC. And I said, well, I don't sell software. It's my day job. But I'm like, let me just explain to you, if I'm connecting all the portfolio that we sell with our ecosystem, even if right now you think they're disconnected, if you gain skills and you buy somebody else's software in this big anchor product, you probably can't get there once I have it connected. You're going to have to switch now to get some basic skills on the connected pieces of the portfolio, so that when there truly are like beyond just BIM 360 connected and we can connect them in a much deeper functional way, like you're not going to be able to catch up. And he said, I never thought of it that way. And I was like, yeah, you're going to have to swap now. Well, there's still switching costs, but they're not as great as when it's going to be in the vision that we just described, right? So you need those foundational skills and tools. And by the way, those are super important. Most of the people that I know, before they think about innovation, they need to think about where they're at with the foundational skills, tools, processes. And then we need to think productization, not just from the physical products that I showed you on the prefab continuum. Workflows need to be productized. So we're using the same workflows over and over. Coding needs to be productized. You know, your VDC elements and things that you're using all the time, things like that need to be productized. And again, it's all about a mindset to drive data reusability. It's like in sports, if every record has an asterisk, what do you really know about performance? A friend of mine and I were talking about, he has a big hospital he was drawing in all VDC. And I said, how much of that could you use for the next hospital? And he said, actually, none of it. And I was like, that's not good, right? Like you just spent all this money and time doing all this cool stuff in VDC, even using our tools. Like we have to figure out how you can productize that to reuse it again. And that's a mindset that you have you believe in data and the reusability of data as a method for certainty. It's like, you got to put down an artificial reef in an ocean. And that's really productization allows for that consistency. So you need to get to that mindset. And that's kind of your first concrete steps of action. If I stop right there and you're at like this place in the framework, that's where you got to go and you've got to focus some of your efforts there. After that, you truly do have to digitize and enable. I don't mean, by the way, you get off paper a lot earlier than this. I don't mean get off paper. I mean, you got to enable automation and start connecting those processes in a digitized format with, you know, engineered data that can be read by multiple places, you know, and be connected with each other, and discrete data you can share and take apart and use. So we then, after productization, have to digitize those and enable automation and connected process. It needs to live in the cloud in a connected platform. So they need to be cloud-based workflows that you can access from anywhere, and lots of shareholders can use them. And you can actually integrate other pieces of software into those that you may have that are either proprietary to you or other companies. But once again, you have that foundational skills and product portfolio, and you get to that platform piece in the cloud, you should be able to connect anything. It should be very easy to connect everything. That's the goal. So that you can optimize things and use things like generative design and digital twins and things like that. And that's so that we can reuse things and apply, you know, machine learning and AI to reduce both digital and physical waste, right? That is truly what's going to be the new possible for the AECM and O. You know, it's funny, I was talking to somebody recently and they were talking to me about a cool program they had. And it was like, it happened to be the robot dogs that were at AU, and they were awesome, right? And I won't say who because I'm protecting the innocent here. But I said, hey, that's so cool that you got to have that robot dog at your company for a certain period of time. I'm like, what did you get out of that? And he was like, well, it's really good, you know, press kind of stuff. And I was like, that's good. I'm like, you know, because for me, the way I look at it, we all know there's an army of robot dogs coming. He and I agree on this. There's an army of robot dogs coming. And it's good that, you know, Autodesk gave them the opportunity. And he was really happy that he could like live with one for a certain period of time, watch how it eats and sleeps and how you pet it, how you make it happy. Just making that up. Robot dogs, I don't know if they're happy. But, you know, you can see what you need when it's one dog and you're in today and you're looking at the future versus when it's an army of robot dogs. And I think that's really the cool benefit of being tied in with your platform provider and your technology provider, is that we can give you a glimpse into some of these things in the future that are coming, that are here, that's going to be like a tsunami. And so this is how you actually reach me. I haven't been on the Peloton that much as I need to be lately, but if you want to talk to me, I'm very happy to connect with any of you on your journey, because it's really my job to do that, to really make this easier for you. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I think we have 15 minutes left to take some questions.
Thank you very much, Amy. What an amazing presentation. And by the way, to our listeners, Amy's contact information is not only available on her PowerPoint slide set, which is in your app, and will remain there for a very long time, but also in the contact list, which is also in the app. So Amy, yeah. Prefab, new industry, new possible, operational consistency, serial owner, data reusability. A lot of times what I hear from our industrial owners is, well, that's good for the building industry when you're building things, but not so much in the industrial setting. What do you have to say to the owner that questions whether or not what you're offering is applicable in the industrial setting as well as in the commercial building side?
Well, I mean, interestingly enough, most of the prefabrication that's done right now is being done in places like manufacturing and industrial and healthcare, and places where there's heavy MEP integration. And the groups that are doing it best are actually doing owner-driven, you know, playbooks that incorporate IC, because it's not just about prefabrication. it's about the data, right? It's about the data in which you want to reuse to build multiple manufacturing facilities, to understand the consistency and certainty of how to build them, the operations of building, the efficiency of building them, the performance of building them. And I think if you're an owner, I remember in the last Kirk conference, I was sitting with Mike Straight from Owens Corning. He's like a perfect example, right? So they're doing lots of owner-driven prefabrication and playbook design. They're a manufacturing company. They're not a building company, right? They recognize that if he needs a building in Shanghai versus one in Toronto, it impacts his underlying business, right? Not just on first cost, but on operational consistency forever if he doesn't get what he wants. So I think as you recognize that and consistency is important to you, you have to really look across the sector and take more control, more influence over what you're getting. And that's the playbook. You own the playbook as the owner.
Another question we had from one of our owners is, what is the primary source of information on new developments? Where does Amy get her data, her resource? Where is she putting her fingers on whose pulse? What are some of your resources that you find most valuable that we ought to be tracking as owners?
I mean, honestly, I have a voracious appetite for learning. That's just, most of you know, I'm sort of on the neurodiversity spectrum of like communication. So I have about 12 to 14 hours of conversations a day and listening to people around the ecosystem. But I do a lot of reading from other industries and other ecosystems. And, you know, that's important because I think we're very insulated here in our ecosystem. And I also love being, you know, the great part about the knowledge center that we're building at Autodesk is because it has to live somewhere else. It has to be in a neutral place that everyone can access. You know, it's funny, so many people come to me in the business and they're like, I want to do this thing. It's never been done before. And I was like, it's actually been done before. You know, I'm like, hey, it's been done before. Let me tell you these 3 things. And like, that shouldn't live in my head or somebody else's head. It has to live in a place where they can go look it up and they can see it. So I would say, like, honestly, I have really strong relationships that help, but I do a lot of reading. At the conferences I go to, I listen to a lot of things that people are talking about. And I'm lucky enough that I help impact, you know, M&A and things like that at Autodesk. So I get to hear about new products and things that are out there all the time. And I don't know, I just love learning. So I have an appetite, like a voracious appetite for learning. Helps me.
Great answer. Well, I have another question from one of our owners, and he or she asks, so Kurt has a tech committee. What kind of agenda items should the tech committee be exploring together as a group of owners?
I think one of the great things, and again, I'm happy to help on that committee at any time.
Thank you for that, by the way.
Yeah,
Terrific.
I mean it. Because one of the things we really need to understand is that, you know everybody talks about the fact that software needs to be democratized, and that means accessible to everybody. But it doesn't mean that each persona wants the same thing. You know what I mean? And I think it would really be helpful for us to interact more with the owners to understand when they utilize our software, what are they looking for that's different than a builder is looking for, than a subcontractor is looking for? Because although the software might behave the same, the reporting structure and the way in which the data is entered and the way in which the workflows happen might be turned upside down a little bit. And I think the more we can work together with owners like at Kurt, the more we can hear from you, your needs, and really adjust. And I think that's important.
Great. And by the way, if you have a question for Amy, we've got about 10 minutes or so to field some of those questions. Simply write them in the chat box feature of this conference Zoom capability. And the folks in our production room will try to get to your questions. So speaking of that, Greg Palmer, I understand you have several questions that have come in. How about our first one from our listeners?
Absolutely. Our industry is starved for investment capital. People are not investing in our industry, not in publicly traded contractors, suppliers, etc. What you're talking about requires making strategic investments. How is this going to happen in your opinion, and who is going to supply that investment capital?
I mean, first, you're asking me to say that that's true. I don't agree, actually, at the moment. I think there's a lot more investment in this space than there ever has been before, especially in Contech, construction technology, and especially in industrialized construction. Anybody that has fab attached to it can get money these days, it seems like, so I don't think that's true. I think not that you have to look at the right places. These people, the people that are investing are taking bets on the future of what the new infrastructure looks like within the ecosystem and who the players are. I think, look, there's a lot of great places. And I think some of the biggest serial owners in the world are making some of those investments. I mean, you know that Amazon and Google and Microsoft have made those investments either directly or through some of the VC development and VC funds, and Autodesk as well. So I think, again, a lot of it is coming from the system influencers that are out there and some of the big ecosystem players. But I definitely see, like, I have tons of interactions with VC development funds. By the way, also Autodesk has a foundation for sustainability where we invest in sustainability for product-wise, as well as for grants. We have grants that are there, and the Forge Foundation. So for those of you who might have seen on CNBC, we did a big investment in a company called Factory OS for their prefabrication technology side. So I think there's a lot of investment out there these days, more than have ever been there before, because in some ways, it's more about, making a bet on the players that can most improve. Like we just said, like I didn't show a lot of charts because like we're kind of at the bottom of the list. Well, if you want to put your money down on a big bet, I'm putting my money down on the top where I have like incremental change. I'm gonna put my money right down on the horse that's in like 30th place, that if he wins or even comes in 5th, I made more money. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of money out there right now. I think if anyone needs to figure out from where, there's a few VC funds that are specific about it, as well as Autodesk. So feel free to call me.
Thank you, Amy. Another question is, of all of the capabilities on the platform, which is the most robust? Which gets most attention from the construction owner, in your opinion?
From the owner, that's a tough one. I don't know if any of them get like that much attention from the owner. I do think like we have some great stuff in Origo for capital planning. That gets a lot of attention from the owner. Anything in capital planning is great. And I think our investment in Origo, as well as in SpaceMaker, which does, generative design test fits and how that's going to apply to the rest of the platform, is really interesting. So I think capital planning gets a lot of that right now. I think the building connected side, which allows owners to go and find services and needs, and you'll see a lot more happening with prefabrication on that site too, in the future. I think, look, at the end of the day, there are certain products that the majority of the ecosystem uses, regardless of who it is, to either design a building or to, construct a building, and they live at Autodesk. So those are those anchor products I said. If you don't have the basic skill set in that, you have to start working on that now. Even if you, like I said to somebody recently, if you saw one of our products and you only looked at it by itself versus one of our competitors, and you only looked at that product, depending on who judged it, we might get a 95 and they could get a 96. I don't know, who knows? However, the beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Lots of times it happens the other way. But let's say we ended up on the bottom of that, number. Well, knowing that it's all going to be connected, if you utilize the anchor products, you're going to think, well, even if it scored somewhat lower, I need it because it's going to be connected. And I think owners want data to be connected. That's what you should be thinking about. BIM 360 connects that data today. And it's great for that. We have lots of owners using BIM 360, I think, to understand, how the information goes across the stakeholders from design and construction and manufacture. But I do think, after capital planning and BIM 360, that owners, especially when you get into the playbook, they will get much more involved in the design of the pieces and parts as partners. Because if you put the effort into that once, you can do that effort once and use it many times for consistency. So I think that's where we'll probably see them where they are now and then where they'll shift.
As a follow-up to that question, the listener asks, is there a particular, an individual industry sector that seems to be consuming these new developments more voraciously than another industry sector? What's the lagging industry sector in your experience, and who's leading in this and the adaptation of these new capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, I hate to call people out. I told you.
That's why we're using industry sectors.
I know. I'm trying to think, how do I knock them up? So I think anything that has heavy MEP integration is usually a little ahead, right? Because if you look at the value of the cost of building a building, if you have heavy MEP in your building, that's where your money is. It happens to be also where the value of most of the fabrication experiences within those subcontractors, right? So I think anything with heavy MEP has been early adapters: healthcare, manufacturing, industrial, semiconductor. I think the other ones that have taken a little leap forward as well are things that are may not be as heavy MEP integrated, but they're cellular in nature. So you'll see lots of heads and beds, I call them, applications like hotels and schools and universities and stuff. But they're not so complex, and there's not necessarily tons of serial owners there. So I don't know. I think it's being adopted in a lot of places, but I think the heavy MEP guys at the moment where the money is have the most to gain because that's where you have the most to benefit from, right?
Great. And I'm glad you're making the business case and mentioned the ROI of these investments. I think the folks upstairs need to have a clear indication of these kind of investments and obviously their return, whether it's improved productivity or whether it's actual, financial monetary return. Greg, I understand we have some more questions from the production booth. Who's next?
Good to hear that Inventor is part of a beta workflow for IC. Do you see Revit as an enabler or a roadblock for IC design?
I think ultimately it's the great enabler, right? I think some of its capabilities move to the cloud as it's already happening. I think I didn't mention Fusion today, but Fusion is in the cloud already and has generative properties. So I think across the board, that's why the connectivity is so important, right? You have things that do certain things on the desktop really, really well, and they need to live there, but you need that connectivity in the cloud to actually share that information. So I happen to mention Inventor today, but Fusion, Forge, those are also really important, especially in the manufacturing. Vault is I know some of my friends out there, owners use Vault, PLM software, as everyone's moving in a different direction. Origo, we mentioned, but I think actually, I didn't mention Pipe. A lot of my owners love Pipe because it uses machine learning for specifications and that falls within their purview. Pipe's a great one too. So I don't know. I think, look, everything has its pros. I won't say even cons. It's just those are the constraints in which you're working for. But the good news is the platform wins all, right? And I think everybody recognizes it's the value of the connectivity of the functionality that wins. And so the good news is I think that Autodesk truly understands that, and people are evolving their current products to make sure that they are connected functionally for the end users, and that we're listening to you to make sure we're prioritizing things the right way, so that you can use them today and also for tomorrow.
Great, thank you. And again, we're speaking with Amy Marks, who's head of Industrialized Construction Strategy and Evangelism for Autodesk. And you're joining us on the heels of a very, very intriguing presentation. And by the way, as I mentioned, the PowerPoint presentation that Amy so generously made available to you will be in the app. It's in the app. You can send it around to whomever you please. So avail yourself of this little slice of terrific information.
I'm gonna fix the sound for you before you start sharing it. Don't share it. By the way, I don't think I mentioned my data.
Oh, you're going to fix the sound on that one little video clip. Okay.
But I don't know if did I forget? I don't know if I mentioned my data center customers. My data center customers, by the way, digital infrastructure, also one of my big winners and the big users. So I think I missed them in my head. I don't know how, but they're really important too. I think we've mentioned some of their names, but
yes,
they're big in that side too.
You certainly have. Greg, is there another question that's in the queue?
There's definitely a huge opportunity for owners and vendors moving down this path. How do you see owners' processes changing with respect to contract change and risk management? In other words, manage the business side of managing DFMA?
I love that, by the way. So I can tell you this right now. It's not hard to prefabricate a pipe or a power skid or anything. It's hard to create culture, leadership, process, and artifacts that support that, to allow you to do that, right? So it's like you can't even make a playbook and pick these pieces and parts. Part of that playbook has to be procurement methodologies, risk management, the way in which the insurance is going to work, how you do, hopefully you partner instead of bidding, right? So you can't get that vision unless you've changed lots of those things. And you can't think about it. I always say, if you do regular target value design in lean and you don't envelop and you don't envision that there'll be multi-trade elements, once you divvy that up amongst the stakeholders, they're not going to give it back to you, that money. It's almost like deciding to do OSIP or owner insurance after everyone's giving you a number for insurance. They're never going to quite give you a dollar for dollar back. So I say it's like if you start only at trade centric levels in any tool, it's like washing a red sock with a white shirt. Like you can try again, but you can wash that shirt a million times. It's always going to come out pink. You have to really start with the end in mind. And that's everything from insurance and contracts and procurement and productization and partnering. You have to have the scopes. You have to understand how that all works, and that all needs to be changed. And most of the time, that's the roadblock, actually. So what I do with a lot of our teams in the consulting is we identify those constraints and we, as a team, remove them. And they're not that hard. And that's why the owner has to be there, lock, stock, and barrel, because most of them are yours. Like they're like your procurement methodology. your buying power, the way in which you want to have things, done. And like, we're just following your lead, So I think a lot of that you have a lot of control over, and we can help to understand the consistency you'll get if you can just change a couple of those parameters. It's super important. You can't miss out on that. And by the way, most of you have those sustainability goals. I just had a contractor come to me the other day, and he corrected me. He's like, I'm not a contractor. I'm a manufacturer now. Like, I don't even call myself that anymore. And he looked at my 40% number and he said, I'm in the drywall business and I only do prefab now. But my industry contributes X% to that 40%. And he said, we need you owners and big guys like Autodesk to stop. Do you know for points for, I won't say which authority, but if you want to get certified, you don't get any points for waste avoidance as a manufacturer. You get it for waste sorting. So he's like, we have to change that. Like, you got to get people to hire me with my products because I don't have any waste and I still can't get the points for sorting. So I don't have enough to sort. So it's like the owners that believe in sustainability have to start believing in productization and the playbook, because that gets us the ultimate in sustainability. It's, going to remove all that waste.
One of the, and I know we're over just a minute or two, and we've got Kirk Perry from Google, president of Google Client and Agency Solutions, up next, following you, Amy. But one of the questions, or one of the comments you made, spurred a question from one of our listeners, and that is the culture. Barriers to deployment of these kind of technologies exist in organization cultures. And the presumption is that younger people bring an eager willingness to the team that perhaps the more seasoned among us do not have, cannot have, and perhaps even resist. How do we do this? How do we make what you guys are creating usable, and what needs to change in the culture in order to effectually adopt what you've created? Thoughts on that, on culture change?
For sure. As part of that foundational skills and tools, we have what's called the Prefab Readiness Assessment, and actually a workshop around just that. Nothing to do with the products, everything to do with the culture. Because at the end of the day, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Is what they say in Lean. And what was that? Jack Welch, I think, said it, right? Mm-hmm. So that's true. Like, by the way, most of the people that are resistant to change, I'm making a generalization, and I love the book, It Starts With One. It's up on my bookshelf. Get the book, It Starts With One, and read that. It talks about change and why people are slow to change. Oftentimes people are slow to change because they don't see what their value is in the future after it changes. So they will do everything they can. Most of the biggest resistance personas are people that actually don't see value for what their current role is in the future. And so kind of ask yourself that, so if like this goes away, what does that group do for me now? That's really what I pay them for. And so you'll hear a lot of the resistance come from some of the silos that are getting paid on some of the stuff we want to remove from the process. So just that's a hint, but I would definitely say read It Starts With One. It's a great book. I think we need just diversity in thought, not just young people, not just men and women, but not just diversity in thought, diversity in perspective, just from some other industries like manufacturing and digital. And it's like, we just need a little bit less insulated group. I always say, if you get a bunch of construction guys in a room and you're like, how do we become more like manufacturers? I'm like, what are they going to say? Like, they don't know, like they're construction guys or gals. And I'm like, but you need to get some manufacturers in that room, right? And like, by the way, just because you can buy a level 4 piece of automation, as my friend Brent McPhail says, a 6-axis arm robot, doesn't mean it's going to be successful for you if nothing around you is at level 4 automation culture. You know what I mean? Like, think of it like that. So you've got to, and he's one of our great consultants at Autodesk that we work with. You've just got to recognize that it's so much more about the technology, or so much more about the physical artifact. It's a lot of having to do with process and culture and people.
Thank you, Amy. Well, we've been talking to Amy Marks, who's head of Industrialized Construction Strategy and Evangelism for Autodesk. And we want to thank you, Amy, for taking your time to share with us what is an absolutely intriguing presentation and an unending story. So more to come, I'm sure. This is like in English class, the ellipsis, right? We're done for now, but there's definitely more to be said on this topic. And we'll look forward to having you back, and perhaps even engaging with our tech committee in the months ahead. And I want to thank you for that. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.